We're coming down from a big solar storm that brought aurora as far south as Wyoming, and that same solar storm caused big headaches for the first responders to Hurricane Dorian. Those stories and more in the news this week. This forecast sponsored in part by Eric Johansson. Check him out at instagram.com/scubist. Space weather this week has definitely been a bit on the exciting side. As we switch to our front side sun, you can see that coronal hole that's leaving the sun's west limb. That coronal hole brought us some fast solar wind, and along with a stealthy solar storm, it brought us up to storm levels at Earth. In fact, it brought us up to G2 levels, which is a moderate storm level, and this lasted over 3 days, so it's an extended storm period. And unfortunately, the peak of the storm happened right around September 1st and 2nd, right when Hurricane Dorian was absolutely hovering over the Bahamas and just decimating multiple cities there. And the first responders and the hurricane watch nets, of course, they went dead. I heard amateur radio operators and emergency responders were having a horrible time trying to get people up on 20 and 40 meters, but they managed to do it sporadically. Luckily, since then, things have been dying down with the storm, and as Dorian continues to ravish the east coast of the United States, it looks like the watch nets are back up and running pretty well. Now, back at the sun, we also have had a very small sunspot that showed up for a little while. It was kind of spitting off a few things here and there, but nothing in terms of flares. There's no real strong activity there, so no worry about radio blackouts. And then that region has since kind of died down a bit. As we switch to our partial backside monitor, this is stereo. It's kind of looking at the sun from the side. You can see there are a couple bright regions on the sun's backside that are going to be rotating into Earth view here in the next few days. They're most likely not strong enough to boost the solar flux any. So amateur radio operators and emergency responders, I'm sorry, the solar flux is going to continue to stay in about the mid to high 60s over the next week. Taking a closer look at Hurricane Dorian shows us yet another example of how dangerous the consequences can be when space weather and terrestrial weather conspire. Right when Hurricane Dorian was slamming the Bahamas, a solar storm was ravaging the Earth shield and upper atmosphere above it. This made communications on the special emergency radio frequency channels called hurricane watch nets nearly unusable. Overall, the solar storm ravaged near-Earth space and the skies above the hurricane for nearly 3 days. During that time, WatchNet responders reported numerous outages, some of them lasting hours on end. Corey McKay, a radio operator near Naples, Florida, remarked that he couldn't receive the net control stations in Miami, Key West, or in the Dominican Republic during the peak of the solar storm. Likewise, James Pasterfield, a net control operator near Las Vegas, said he had to switch from 20 to 40 meters to hear any emergency traffic at all. Even after the solar storm began to wane on September 3rd, Daryl Youngblood said that 40 meters was, quote, horrible at best, but still usable. And all of this happened while Dorian hovered over Freeport and the Abaco Islands in the Bahamas, slowly making its way toward the Florida coast. Since then, the solar storm has quieted down somewhat, which is good news, as the citizens of Bahamas are beginning to pick up the pieces of their lives without food, shelter, power, cell phone towers, or any of the communication infrastructure we usually take for granted. Guaranteed, amateur and emergency radio is their lifeline right now. Sadly, though I've been watching hurricane coverage from news outlets all over the world, not once have I heard anything about the impacts of this solar storm on emergency radio responders or on the fragile lifeline they hold for people in need. And when that lifeline can be lost because of space weather events like this G2 level storm we just had, that's when it's more important than ever for meteorologists to provide relevant information to the public about these dangers, for all kinds of weather. You shouldn't have to hear your space weather information from me only. Yet here we are once again, looking at a new kind of perfect storm, one in which solar storms exacerbate dangerous terrestrial storms. And if we don't embrace the role space weather plays, soon we could all be left without a lifeline. Switching to our moon, we are now passing through the first quarter phase, and by the 8th, the moon will be about 70% illuminated. So you night sky watchers, if you want to check out those dim objects in the sky, you need to check your local rise and set times. Switching to your solar storm conditions and aurora possibilities over the coming week, we are still coming down from that moderate level solar storm that bumped us up to G2 levels here over the past couple days. But luckily the storm is finally beginning to wane. At high latitudes, NOAA is only expecting unsettled conditions with up to about a 20 to 25% chance of a major storm. Now mid latitudes, things are a little bit more quiet. We're also expecting unsettled conditions, but only about a 20% chance of active conditions. And this is good news to you emergency responders for Hurricane Dorian, especially those working the hurricane watch nets. It doesn't look like we're going to have that much more problems from the solar storm causing disruptions on radio frequencies. So luckily, as things continue to quiet down through the week, it should get better and better. Switching to your solar flare and particle radiation storm outlook over the coming week, we do have a bright region on the Earth-facing disk right now, but it is not causing any big flares, so everything is still in the green. When it comes to flares and radio blackouts, we don't have any risk for that. Luckily, though, it is boosting the solar flux just a little bit. We're now sitting in the high 60s, and that will continue here over the next few days before that region rotates off of the Earth-facing disk. So amateur radio operators and emergency responders, you're getting a little bit of a boost for radio propagation, but it's not all that much. Now, meanwhile, because we are in solar minimum, we have a cosmic ray flux that's a bit higher than it normally would be. So you frequent flyers, and this does include aircrew who fly over 800 hours annually and fly at high latitudes and high altitudes, you are in the moderate range for radiation dose, and this does include prenatal passengers. So please take this into consideration in your flight plans. So the space weather this week has been very exciting. We've had a big solar storm that's bumped us up to G2 levels and has brought aurora clear down to mid-latitudes. Now, you aurora photographers, if you're at high latitudes, you're probably still going to get a show over the next day or two, but you mid-latitude aurora photographers, you can finally take a break because things are finally beginning to subside. Now, amateur radio operators and emergency responders, especially those working on the hurricane watch nets for Dorian, things are looking up because it does look like the space weather is definitely going to be calming down over the next few days, and we'll even get back to reasonably unsettled to quiet conditions here by week's end. So that should mean good news for hurricane watch nets and continued assistance for Dorian, because I know that storm is still ravaging the east coast of the United States. Now, as far as you GPS users are concerned, well, things get kind of riled up around these hurricanes as well. So your GPS could be a little bit glitchy if you're anywhere near that storm area. Plus, we're still kind of coming down from this solar storm, so if you happen to be anywhere near aurora or near those dawn dust terminators, your GPS reception could be a bit off, so just take that into consideration. I'm Tamitha Skov. Thank you for watching.